The morning I walked into that courtroom, I wore the same soft blue cardigan Harold gave me on our 25th anniversary. My hands were steady, my breath even, my heart
Calm.
for the first time in years. I had spent decades being quiet, working late nights cleaning offices, selling pies at church bazaars, mending dresses for neighbors, all so my daughter, Lena, could have opportunities one never knew. And now, at 72, they thought I was just an old woman clinging to a house. They believed they had stripped me of every ounce of dignity. What they never realized was that I carried a story much older, much stronger than their greed. When I stepped into the courtroom, Lena rolled her eyes and leaned toward her husband, Trent, whispering something that made them both smirk. But then something unexpected happened. The judge lifted his head from the stack of papers. His eyes locked on me. His expression froze, as if the past had walked into the room. In a hushed voice, barely audible, he said, "It's her." The entire courtroom went silent. Lawyers paused mid-sentence. Clerks stopped typing. Even the bailiff shifted nervously. Lena's smug look wavered. Trent frowned with confusion. They had no idea what those two words meant. But I did. I had lived long enough to recognize when fate was about to turn. Every morning in Riverton, Ohio, began the same way for me. I rose at 6, poured water into my old kettle, and reached for the chipped mug that had survived more than 20 years of breakfasts. The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen while I checked on the African violets lined up on the windowsill. My late husband, Harold, loved those flowers. Tending to them kept him close to me, even after he was gone. My life was not extraordinary. It was a rhythm of small habits, each one stitched with memory and meaning. I had never traveled far or lived in luxury, but I had poured every ounce of myself into raising my daughter, Lena. To most people, I was just a quiet grandmother. But in my heart, I carried decades of sacrifice. That Thursday evening was meant to be special. I had spent hours preparing Harold's favorite chicken and dumplings, the dish Lena used to beg for as a child. I laid out my embroidered tablecloth, the one I had worked on when she was a teenager, and placed fresh flowers in the center of the table. I wanted to remind her that this was still her home, filled with love, filled with memories. When they arrived, Trent walked straight into Harold's old armchair, switched on the television, and acted as if the house belonged to him. Lena stood there in the green dress I had bought her, her expression as cold as winter air. "Mom, we need to talk," she said in a clipped tone that made her sound like a stranger. She announced that the house was too big for me, that I couldn't maintain it anymore, and that they needed it for their growing family. They had already found a retirement community, perfect for someone my age. My voice trembled as I pleaded, reminding her this was where her father died, holding my hand, where every wall carried our story. But she only said, "Memories are in the heart, Mom, not on the walls." A few days later, Trent arrived without warning, bringing along a real estate appraiser in a gray suit. The man walked through my house, as if it were already for sale. He measured rooms with quick, detached movements and scribbled notes on a clipboard. "The pipes are outdated," he said flatly. "The kitchen tiles are old-fashioned. This place would need a full renovation." I stood silently in the corner, clutching the edge of my apron. Those tiles he dismissed so casually had been placed one by Harold's hands when Lena was 10. I remembered the sweat on his brow, the patience in his smile, the hope in his voice as he told me, "This kitchen will last us a lifetime." Now it was being reduced to a line on a checklist. Lena followed the appraiser, nodding at his comments, never once looking at me. Each word felt like a hammer striking the walls of my heart. My home was no longer sacred to them. It was only property, numbers, and profit. The following week, they returned with a lawyer in tow. Trent carried himself like a man already in possession of the house, while Lena avoided meeting my eyes. The lawyer spread a stack of documents across my dining table and spoke with rehearsed politeness. "Mrs. Whitaker, these are the transfer papers. Once you sign, the property will be in safe hands. Everything has been arranged for your comfort." I scanned the pages. The words blurred together. Transfer of ownership, permanent, irrevocable. My chest tightened. This wasn't about selling the house to someone new. This was about taking it for themselves. When I refused, Trent's mask slipped. His tone hardened. You're not in a condition to make decisions anymore, Nora. Lena is your heir. She's acting in your best interest. The lawyer added quietly, if you don't cooperate, we may have to consider proceedings for mental incapacity. The room spun. My own daughter, the child I had worked myself ragged to raise, was preparing to strip me of everything I had left. My hands shook, but I forced the words out. I'm not signing anything. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I sat in Harold's armchair, the silence pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am too old, too fragile, too useless to stand in their way. The thought cut deeper than any insult Trent had ever thrown at me. My eyes wandered to the framed photos on the wall. Lena as a baby in my arms. Harold smiling at her graduation. Our family gathered around Christmas dinner. Every memory told me I had lived for others, given everything. Now I was being treated like a burden. I whispered into the quiet, Harold, I don't know how to fight this alone. The next afternoon, as I wandered through the house like a ghost, I opened Harold's old desk drawer. Mostly faded bills, envelopes, letters I'd seen before. But tucked beneath them was a slim folder bound with a tiny lock. My breath caught. I had never noticed it in all these years. I searched the drawers, then the shelves, until I found a small brass key hidden inside one of Harold's favorite books about investing. My hands trembled as I slid the key into the lock and turned it. The folder creaked open. Inside was a stack of documents neatly arranged with Harold's initials on the corner. Most pages were contracts and statements I didn't fully understand. But one caught my attention instantly. It was a will, signed and dated just 6 months before Harold passed. I sank into the chair as I began to read. Line by line, my reality shifted. Harold had been far more careful, far more deliberate than I had ever realized. And what Lena and Trent thought they could take from me was only a shadow of what Harold had left behind. Harold had never spoken much about money. I thought we lived on his modest salary and the little I earned from odd jobs. But as I flipped through the folder, the truth unfolded before me. For decades, he had quietly invested every extra dollar, buying small properties when prices were low, putting money into company stocks, even purchasing a piece of land outside Riverton that was now worth a fortune. The numbers on the statements made my head spin. But the greatest shock was yet to come. The building where Lena and Trent lived, the place they thought they were paying rent for each month, was ours. All those checks had been funneled into an account under Harold's name, now mine. For 2 years since his death, rent from every tenant had been quietly deposited, untouched, waiting for me. My heart pounded. I wasn't just a widow clinging to a single house. Harold had left me an empire my daughter and her husband knew nothing about. At the bottom of the folder was an envelope addressed in Harold's familiar handwriting. My fingers shook as I unfolded the letter, and his voice seemed to rise from the page. My dearest Nora, if you are reading this, then I am no longer by your side. Forgive me for keeping the secret, but I wanted it to be a gift for your later years. You worked harder than anyone I've ever known, and you gave everything for Lena and me. I wanted you to live without fear, to know you would always be safe. I must also tell you, I never fully trusted Trent. There is something in him that worries me, ambition with no heart. That is why I arranged the inheritance as I did. If Lena treats you with love and respect, she will share in this legacy. If not, you hold all the power to protect yourself. Use it wisely, not to hurt, but to teach. By dawn, I had made my decision. The tears from the night before had dried, replaced by a calm I hadn't felt in years. I brewed my coffee, watered the violets, and set the folder of documents neatly on Harold's old desk. For the first time in a long while, I felt steady, almost unshakable. When Lena and Trent arrived that morning with boxes and movers, expecting me to be packed and ready, they found me sitting in my armchair, sipping tea as if nothing in the world could bother me. Mom, what are you doing? Lena asked impatiently. The movers are here. I'm not leaving, I said, my voice even. Trent smirked, stepping closer, his tone sharp. Mrs. Whitaker, you don't have a choice. I met his eyes directly, refusing to look away. You're right, Trent. I don't have a choice. But it turns out you don't either. The mover stood awkwardly in the hallway, waiting. Trent waved his hand toward them. Go on, start with the living room, he barked. Not so fast, I interrupted, rising slowly from my chair. I walked to Harold's desk and picked up one of the deeds. Did you know? I asked calmly. That the apartment you've been living in for 3 years has never really belonged to you? Trent's smirk faltered. We pay rent every month, Lena said, confused. Yes, I replied. To a management company that transfers it directly to me, because I own the entire building. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the creak of the movers shifting on their feet. Lena stared at the paper in my hand, reading it again and again. Trent grabbed it from her, his face turning pale as the truth sank in. This has to be fake, he snapped. You're bluffing. Check the records yourself, I said evenly. You'll find I'm not bluffing at all. Trent's voice rose, anger spilling through his teeth. Even if this is true, you can't stop us. We'll fight it in court. You'll lose everything. I folded my hands in front of me. On the contrary, you have 30 days to find another place to live. After that, the law allows me to evict you. Lena gasped, her eyes filling with panic. Mom, you can't mean that. Family doesn't scheme to take away what isn't theirs, I answered firmly. You made your choice when you tried to push me out. Trent, desperate now, blurted out. Tell her, Lena. Tell her why she can't do this. Lena's lips trembled. Mom, I'm pregnant. The words pierced me deeper than any threat. I would be a grandmother, yet I was finding out like this, used as a bargaining chip. For a brief moment, my resolve wavered. But then Harold's letter echoed in my mind. Use it not to hurt, but to teach. I straightened my shoulders. Congratulations, Lena. But that doesn't erase what you've done. Lena's eyes brimmed with tears as she turned toward Trent. Maybe we should just apologize. Try to make this right. Trent's face hardened. I will never bow to her. She's manipulating you. She's manipulating all of us. I stood quietly, letting his words hang in the air. The truth was finally showing itself. Trent, please, Lena pleaded, clutching his arm. She's my mother. We can't throw her out like garbage. No, he barked, shaking her hand away. You're weak if you give in. In that moment, I saw something shift in Lena. For years, she had echoed his voice, mirrored his disdain. Now, she was staring at him as if she truly saw him for the first time. She turned back to me, her voice trembling. Mom, I was wrong. I let him convince me that you were a burden. I believed him because it was easier than admitting I married the wrong man. I swallowed hard. Words are a beginning, Lena. But only actions will show me you've chosen differently. 2 weeks later, Trent returned in a rage. The building manager called up to my apartment, his voice nervous. Mrs. Whitaker, he's demanding to be let in. He says his wife is being held against her will. I went down to the lobby, calm as ever. Trent stood there, eyes bloodshot, the smell of alcohol heavy on his breath. He jabbed a finger toward me. You give me back my wife right now, or I'll have you arrested for kidnapping. Lena is exactly where she wants to be, I replied evenly. And you are standing on my property, which means you'll leave now. He laughed bitterly. This isn't your building. Without a word, I dialed my attorney, Camille Current, and put the call on speaker. Camille, could you confirm who owns this building? Of course, Nora, she said. You are the sole legal owner. The manager's eyes widened. Trent's mouth snapped shut. For the first time, he had no answer. The weeks that followed were filled with preparation. Trent filed a lawsuit, claiming I had manipulated Lena, alienated her from him, and schemed to ruin their marriage. He even threatened to fight for custody of the baby. It was absurd, but I knew I needed to be ready. Camille gathered everything. Text messages where Trent insulted Lena, voicemails where he threatened to leave her if she didn't push me into a retirement home, sworn statements from neighbors who had heard us shouting through the walls. Piece by piece, the truth was documented. At the kitchen table, Camille coached me. Answer directly, Nora. No extra words. The truth speaks for itself. Beside me, Lena practiced too, her voice shaking as she read her statement. I betrayed my mother because Trent convinced me she was weak. I was wrong. Hearing her say it aloud was painful, but necessary. The courtroom would demand nothing less than honesty. The morning of the trial arrived with heavy clouds. Trent strutted in with an expensive lawyer at his side, his confidence fueled by arrogance. He glanced at me with the same contempt I had seen for years. But this time, I felt no fear. I had truth on my side. His attorney painted me as a bitter old woman who couldn't let go, a manipulative mother who used money to destroy her daughter's marriage. The words stung, but I sat silently, waiting. When it was our turn, Camille rose with calm authority. She laid out the evidence, text messages dripping with insults, recordings of threats, witnesses ready to testify. Each piece struck like a hammer. Trent's smirk began to fade. Then came the moment no one expected. The judge removed his glasses and looked at me closely. Mrs. Whitaker. Nora Whitaker, his voice softened. Do you remember me? 30 years ago, in family court Judge Harlan's office, you were the secretary who stayed late to help an overwhelmed intern. Recognition struck. Beneath the gray hair and stern demeanor was Marcus Ellery, the timid young man I had once encouraged. Marcus, I whispered, throat tight. Of course, I remember. The courtroom froze. Trent's lawyer stammered, claiming conflict of interest. But Judge Ellery's voice was steady. There is no conflict. There is only justice. And the evidence is clear. Mr. Maddox has been the manipulator all along. For the first time in years, the balance of power shifted entirely. Kindness, it seemed, had circled back when I least expected it. Judge Ellery's ruling was swift and decisive. He denied all of Trent's claims, declaring there was no evidence I had manipulated Lena or interfered in their marriage. Instead, he concluded that Trent had subjected both Lena and me to intimidation, coercion, and emotional abuse. The gavel struck, sealing the verdict. Trent was barred from approaching either of us, stripped of any parental rights until further review, and ordered to pay court costs and damages for the suffering he had caused. Trent's face turned ashen, his bravado gone. His lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but it was useless. The fight was over. Beside me, Lena wept quietly, relief washing over her. I placed my hand over hers, not as a victory gesture, but as a reminder that this was not the end. This was only the beginning of rebuilding what had been broken. Outside the courthouse steps, she clung to me, whispering, "Mom, we're free." Freedom did not erase the wounds. When Lena moved back into the house, the air between us was fragile, filled with unspoken questions. I set clear boundaries. If you stay here, it won't be as a guest. You'll contribute. You'll be responsible. And you'll earn my trust back. She nodded, eyes lowered. At first, the silence between us was heavy. We spoke only about daily necessities, the weather, groceries, her morning sickness. Yet I noticed small changes. She washed her dishes immediately after meals, kept her room neat, even helped tend Harold's violets without being asked. One afternoon, I found her folding laundry in the living room, something she had never done before. She looked up, nervous, and said, "I want you to see I can take care of things on my own." It wasn't much, but it was a start. Actions, I reminded myself, not words, would show whether my daughter had truly returned to me. As the months passed, I knew Harold's legacy could not remain only within our family. Too many women like me had been silenced, pushed aside, or stripped of their dignity by those they loved most. With Camille's guidance, I used part of the inheritance to establish the Second Porch Foundation, a refuge for older women facing abandonment or abuse. We called it Second Porch because every woman deserves another place to sit, to breathe, and to belong when her first porch has been taken away. Within the first year, we housed 15 women. Their stories were heartbreakingly familiar. Children who sold their parents' homes without consent. Siblings who claimed inheritances with lies. Husbands who discarded their wives when they grew frail. Letters began to pour in, thanking us for restoring hope. One woman wrote, "You gave me back my name. I am not just a burden anymore." Every word reminded me that my pain had been transformed into purpose. Harold's gift was no longer just for me. It was for all of us. 5 years later, the garden in Riverton was alive with color. My granddaughter, Isla, now 4 years old, ran barefoot across the grass, chasing butterflies, her laughter echoing through the yard. Lena stood at the porch steps, her hands dusted with flour from preparing Sunday lunch. She had rebuilt her life, going back to school, becoming an accountant at a small but thriving firm. More importantly, she had regained that easy laugh I remembered from her childhood. That afternoon, an envelope arrived addressed to me. It was an invitation to the dedication of the third second porch home. Dozens more women would soon find safety and dignity within its walls. Later that week, Judge Marcus Ellery visited with his wife. He smiled warmly and said, "Nora, your work has inspired us all. The Retired Judges Association wants to honor you for what you've built." As Isla climbed into my lap, holding a yellow flower, I realized how far we had come. Pain had been turned into legacy. Love had survived its hardest test. Looking back, I see now that true strength was never in shouting or fighting louder. It was in standing calmly, with the truth in my hands, refusing to be erased. Harold's letter had told me to use power, not to hurt, but to teach. And that is what I tried to do. Lena learned that respect cannot be forced. And I learned that dignity is something we must protect for ourselves. If my story reminds you of your own, know this: you are not powerless. Even in the darkest moments, there is always a way to reclaim your voice, your place, and your worth. Sometimes life circles back with unexpected kindness, the way Judge Ellery remembered me after decades. Sometimes the victory is simply refusing to be pushed aside. If you found meaning here, I invite you to share this story. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to protect your home from your children? Where are you watching from? Thank you for listening. And remember, dignity never expires.